Drawing is at the very heart of what an artist does, in comics and just about every other visual art too. But there's more to it than that. This evening we have one of the great comic book artists of the last 30 years. Someone who can give us an idea of the challenges that a comic book artist faces day to day, as well as some of the experiences that make his work unlike anyone else's. Please welcome our mentoring guest artist, the multi-talented Adam Kubert. Thanks. Adam, thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome. Have a seat.
Hi, everybody.
Wow. What a thrill it is to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us. Let's see. Let's look at our first question. Now, normally we ask our guests how they got into the comic book industry. And you have such a unique experience. Could you share some of that with us?
Well, my experience was a little different getting into the comic book business because my family is in the comic book business. Mm-hmm. My dad has drawn comics since he was 11 years old. So I grew up with it. Mm-hmm. So it was really, part of my genes. And, it was something that I almost had to do. Not that I was forced to do it, but it was something that, I was destined to do.
Destiny. Now, you started at a very young age.
Yeah.
Age of 12?
Yeah. Well,
Wow.
actually about 13, right.
12, 13 years old. You were working for your dad at DC, correct?
Yes. I was, this is kind of interesting. I started out lettering for comic books. And it wasn't because, I particularly wanted to get into comics. It was because I had the ability to do the work. And rather than, toss a newspaper on somebody's front steps, I lettered comics.
Oh,
Yeah.
just like any other 12-year-old would love to do,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. Let me, one other interesting thing. Some of you may not have ever heard of the game show What's My Line? Mm-hmm. I was on What's My Line as the youngest professional letterer. And, that was like when I was 13 years old, so it was pretty cool.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Now, this is a question maybe you don't know the answer to, but are you in the Guinness Book of World Records as the youngest letterer?
I guess I could be, but I don't think so.
Okay. Now, you studied at Rochester, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you studied, let's see, it's medical illustration?
Correct.
Okay, now that doesn't seem like the typical path to comic books. Mm-hmm. I don't know of any other comic creator that studied that. How does that affect your work?
Well, it's great because as a medical illustrator, you have to know all the muscles. I took courses, it was called a gross anatomy course where I took right alongside doctors. We had our own cadaver that we studied. But the reason I went into medical illustration was I didn't want to go into comics because there was a huge shadow in front of me, which was obviously my dad. So I wanted to find my own path, and I loved science. I loved art. I put the two together. I applied to 3 schools, was accepted into one, and that's the one I went to. Mm-hmm. But I went through 4 years. I have a degree in medical illustration, and I got out of school. I found I didn't really like it. I didn't like dealing with doctors. It just didn't work for me.
Yeah, they creeped you out?
Oh, they creep me out.
Yeah.
They kind of, I'm an artist, kind of a little artsy and stuff, and they kind of talk down to you, and I it just wasn't a pleasant experience for me. Mm-hmm. So all through college, I was constantly drawing things out of my head. I would do concert posters whenever a band would come and play at the school, or party posters, or anybody needed a drawing, I would do it. Mm-hmm. So, I thought, I got out of school, I was doing medical illustration, like I said, and I didn't like it, so I decided to follow my destiny.
Your destiny.
Which was straight to my dad's school, because the price was right, and I went through 3 years there, and that's when I started working.
Now tell us about studying at the Kubert School, your namesake.
Yeah.
Now, it was founded by your parents, both parents, mother
Correct.
and father. Now, that's a unique set of challenges that most of us don't have to deal with. Could you expound on what that experience is like?
Well, there's no such thing as missing class, or missing your homework, which is kind of a good thing because that kind of that sets the tone for the professionalism that we all have to exude, upon exiting the school. But yeah, I had my dad as a teacher. He was, he didn't really, it's kind of interesting. He'll show you something if you ask him. But if you don't ask him, he's not going to just come over and help you. So I really didn't have instruction from him until I went to the school and I had him as a teacher.
You had to pay him before
I
he
had
would
to
give
pay
you
him, and exactly.
Yeah.
So he's the best teacher there, and of course, I sponged as much information off of him as I could, both in and out of class, and through that, that environment, I think I did all right, going through the school.
Yeah. Now, do you think that your father didn't want to push the comic industry onto you? That's why he didn't offer advice until you actually were going to school there and really took that?
No, it's a little different. Well, along those lines, he wanted us to do, I have 4 siblings. For all of us, he wanted us to do what we wanted to do. Whether it was, he wanted us to follow our passion. And if we were passionate about pumping gas, go ahead and pump gas, because if you really like pumping gas, maybe someday you'll own a bunch of gas stations.
Sure.
So it just took a little, it took a little time, but he didn't. No, he absolutely didn't push it on us. He let us figure it out for ourselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you're now a teacher and director at the Kubert School.
That's correct.
And that's got to give you a completely different perspective on the comics industry now over the last few decades, really. How has that changed, and what's your perspective on what the industry is like now?
I consider it a microcosm of similar to going to a convention, because we all have something in common. We all love comics. We all love to draw, and we're passionate about it. The students at the school have a tremendous amount of energy, and whenever I step into that building, it's a daily reminder how lucky I am and how lucky everybody else is, because they're paying to learn something that I already, I'm lucky enough and fortunate enough to be able to do. So that's, for me, that's the benefit that I get from them. The other way around, it's really it's a very healthy environment to learn under. It's very small classes, small school, a lot of personal attention, and it's really a terrific environment.
Oh, that's awesome. That is really amazing. Now, because the Kubert School is one of the most distinguished comics and illustration schools in the world, really, you now have like a very impressive list of alumni.
Correct.
Now, how do you keep individuality out of your students and for them to have that perspective? They find their own voice with some of the masters that have now come through there.
Right. Well, we stress to everyone that they each have their own unique voice, their unique voice, or a unique voice. And we don't say suggest that you follow the trend, the popular artist. It's best to develop your own style. That's not to say you shouldn't copy what other people do or pay attention to what other people do or be influenced by what other people do. That's what makes you, you. What Josh had said earlier about tracing, in a similar vein, I have an assignment where I have them copy another artist's style, because you learn a lot from looking at what other people do. But in the end, it all becomes you and your own unique stamp. It's like your work is your signature. It's how you sign your name. That's you. So we stress that, because there's already a Jim Lee, so don't be a Jim Lee. Right. There's already other people. So
sure. Just to follow up on that, as some of these artists that are out there, they're trying to figure out their voice. That takes time. And how do you say to someone, be patient with that, and realize that taking time to find your voice is part of the process, but also how do they come to the process of finding out who they are?
I think deadlines are all about finding who you are, because deadlines is what pushes everybody. You got to get something done by a certain amount of time. Okay. If you're struggling with trying to do something a certain way, well, guess what? You don't have time to do a perfect job. You'll have time with the next job that you have, or the next job. I mean, that's really the beauty of comic books is you're drawing a hell of a lot. 22 pages of artwork in a month is a lot of drawing, and it's a lot of knowledge that has to go into each drawing and each page and each panel and each face. So if you don't get it right the first time, you'll get it right the second time. If you don't get it right the second time, you'll get it right the 100th time. And as that's why comic artists, the more they work, the more they draw, the better they get. So really, I think it's about producing. The best you can do for yourself is by producing a lot of work.
I guess it's like that in just about any profession or any skill that you're trying to develop. You have to put in the time, put in the effort.
Yeah.
Hit batting practice over and
There's
over.
no shortcut.
Yeah.
No shortcut.
Now, we're in an evolving world. Technologically, the creative barriers are being changed all the time. You have different ways of delivering the product and also the creative tools that are using. How does an organization like the Kubert School, how do they stay current?
Higher ups in the comic book community come to the school. We have a PAC meeting, an advisory board. They come to the school twice a year, and Joe Quesada's on it, has come before. Paul Levitz has come, just notable people, and we have a meeting, and we have lunch. Then we go out drinking. No.
Yeah.
But we all sit around a table, and they go through our curriculum and give us advice on as to what we may improve upon, or something that isn't quite working, or something that may not be a standard in the industry. Because really, it's Andy and myself at this point guiding the ship, so to speak. And we don't know, we can't keep track of everything that's going on in the industry, and we look for advice whenever we can get it. I mean, we're fortunate. Andy's over at DC doing Batman. I'm over at Marvel doing Spider-Man at this point. We do have our hands in those two sections, but we can't keep an eye on everything that's going on.
Sure, yeah. You have to tap into the resources that you have available, especially in the position you're in now, that you've got an opportunity to be able to speak with some of the best minds in the industry, some of the best artists, and get their viewpoint on what's going on. So that's really
things change really quick. I mean,
overnight now.
Overnight, right? So you can't keep on track of everything.
Now, one reality that has probably stayed consistent is financially. It's the realities, the stark and sometimes brutal realities of trying to make a career in the comic book industry. How do you phrase that to someone new, starting out? Maybe some starstruck people, maybe some people that have a more realistic view. What do you tell people when they're wanting to get into the industry?
They have to be passionate. I mean, it's not work, it's not a job if it's something that you love. Plain and simple. It's not an easy road. It's very difficult because it's a very difficult kind of job. I mean, you don't get into the business to get rich or famous. If you are, it's the wrong business to get into.
Yeah.
You have to get into it because this is something that you have to do, something you want to do no matter what. Because there's so much. I mean, for me, there's and I'm sure everybody here and the people that at the school, you get so much enjoyment from putting something down on paper that works. Your drawing works. Maybe it's never 100% ever. It's maybe, for me, it's maybe like 60%. So 60% of the time, if it works, that's the biggest thrill in the world.
Oh,
yes.
It's passion is the key. Making sure that you are tapping into what makes you go as a person.
It's what makes you happy.
We're going to have to wrap up soon, but I do want to touch on a few things. Are you tempted to go full digital now at this point? I know that some people have gone full digital, but still, pen to paper, pencil to paper.
Yeah, I'm not tempted to go all digital. I hear it's fast, but I mean, I like putting pencil to paper. I work in a hybrid form where I do most of my penciling on paper, but I'll scan it in and manipulate it a little bit and work it that way. But I more traditional.
Okay. You've had a long relationship with Marvel's X-Men universe. Is that a place you feel comfortable, maybe just with licensed characters in general?
I love Marvel. I love Marvel characters. I'll be the first to admit it. Yeah, I'm very comfortable. I'm comfortable with the people at Marvel. The people are, they're passionate about their job. They love what they do. They really care about the product that they put out. And that's not just me because I've been there for 20 years. It's I choose to be there. I don't have to be there.
Yeah.
And I love their characters, whether it's X-Men or Fantastic Four or Hulk or, it really doesn't matter.
Are you tempted to ever go off on your own and do something completely creator-owned?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Yeah. Yes.
So.
Yes, yes, and yes.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Well, we appreciate your time. What's next for you?
Next, I'm working, my next job is Avengers with Mark Waid. Avengers starting with #1, so pretty psyched about that.
All right, guys, we have time to take a few questions from the audience. Who would like to ask something of Adam here? Please. We have.
Growing up, as you were getting more and more into what you do today, how many hours a day did you draw? Like, how many hours did you put into it before you got to a point where you're pretty okay with it? Or like...
Okay with, confident with my drawing, or?
Just in general, like how many hours a day or how many hours in general did you just beat your craft with?
I'm at my board 10 hours a day. But I would say I'm actually working productively, I would say 6 to 8. Because, there's phone calls, there's this thing that comes up, to really be honest with yourself, how long you're at the table. I would say also that I'm never gonna be 100% satisfied with what I do. I'm satisfied enough to move on, and if I'm not satisfied enough to move on, I still move on. I think it's a lifelong process, what we do. You keep getting, the more you do, the better you get.
And not to speak for you, but we're talking now professionally, you're putting in 6 to 8 productive hours a day. Probably before that, when you're starting out, you couldn't even count the number of hours you put into drawing and just the amount of time you spent.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
I mean, I have a family, I have a school, I have, so there's a lot of things that there's life. So.
You've put in more than your 10,000 hours of being a master at this point. Do we have any other questions?
You say you use a hybrid method. I was wondering if you could explain what that method is, what your process is, and objectively, if you can, what do you think some of the pros and cons of that might be?
I start out with a small thumbnail, draw a pencil on paper. I'll take that, I'll scan it into the computer, manipulate a little bit in Photoshop, print it out on printer paper, up large, 11 by 17. Then I'll take a 2-ply board and put it on a light box. And then I'll trace off of my thumbnail. The important thing is that you're constantly drawing and constantly updating the work that you do. After that, I'll scan that in. I'll scan in my large rough drawing into the computer, manipulate it maybe a little more if I want to make a head bigger or, a panel bigger or something. I'll print that out in light blue. And then I'll tighten up my pencils on that light blue. That way I'm able to do a nice clean drawing. My underdrawing is always there. I'm not erasing my underdrawing, and the spontaneity of the drawing is still there. Then I could either, I'll either ink that, maybe I'll ink part of it digitally, or, I'll work it that way. So the advantage to doing that for me is each time I go through my work, whether it's the thumbnail stage, the rough stage, the tight pencils, the inks, it's another pass. It's another, bringing it under your nose. And I believe, I work on maybe 10 pages at once. So I'm doing all the thumbnails, I'm doing all the roughs, I'm doing all the tight pencils. And it'll take, there's a period of time that goes by between, by the time I work on different pages. So, I'll work on page 1, and maybe a day later, 2 days later, I'll be working on page 1 again. Every time I look at it, I see it with a fresh eye. So then I can see my mistakes a lot easier. My work has been going faster. Early on, I would, like the most books I ever produced in a year was like 6 books, okay? And I slowed down once I started teaching and being more involved with the school. I slowed down like 3 or 4 books a year. Now this year, I'm slated to hit 11 issues. The faster you are, the more work you produce, the better you get.
Okay, so my question is, so a lot of artists don't even go to art school, and some of them are like pretty famous, like all of a sudden they would have like a book that would be picked up and published and stuff. So I don't know, cartooning is one of those unique careers where you could really go to art school and study it and sometimes be successful. But what do you think of the people that don't have any formal art training? That, like, I don't know, do you look at their work and you're like, oh, if they went to my school, you know, I would teach them to do that or something like that. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I do know what you mean. I think everybody takes their own path, whether or not they go to, my dad never went to art school, you know, and he did okay. So I don't think it matters. You know, I think, you know, art school is a way to quicken the process. You know, it's still going to happen. You're still going to get to that point at some time. You know, everybody takes their own path. You know, so you know, I don't think the art school is for everybody. A lot of people can't afford it. I mean, it's a big chunk of change. It may take a little longer because you know my school or any place else. You know, like I said before, it quickens the process. You know, cram a lot of information in a shorter amount of time, but eventually you get there. And I mean, really, we're in no rush. You know, you're in no rush. You're going to be around for a while. You know, maybe you'll get more out of it if you pound the pavement and work really hard to get, you know, where it might be easier if someone's parents foot the bill and you know everything's handed to them. You know, it depends on the person.
Now, art school might provide a discipline that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise. Would you say that? Maybe, but there's no substitute for work. You got to work whether you're in school or whether you're not.
At the school, I mean, we work the students. You know, they're there from 8:30 until 4 o'clock every day, working, drawing. Then they have homework at night and on the weekends. You know, there's 5 days a week they're there, 10 classes a week drawing. So it's a lot of work. And you know, once you get out, hopefully that amount of work will translate into dollars. You know, at some point.
Hopefully. We have time for one more question. Pablo?
Yes. This question is about your upcoming project with Mark Waid on Avengers. I was wondering, what's the concept of this new endeavor with you and Mark on Avengers?
All new, all different. All new, all different Avengers. In fact, on my first script it said ANAD, and I was like, what? ANAD, what is that? You know, all new, all different. It's a younger team, very racially diverse, which I think, you know, adds an element which the Avengers may not have had in the past, which will make it different. And I think with Mark Waid at the helm, it's going to be really, really good. And I'm pretty psyched about it. I've never worked with Mark before, and more than anything, whether it was on Avengers or whatever, you know, when this opportunity came up, I tackled him. Said I want to do this with you.
All right, guys. Thanks again to Adam, Kubert for being here. Please a warm round of applause for him. Taking the time to be here with us. We truly appreciate it. Lots of insight. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Maybe you could have him as a teacher if you're willing to pay for it to find out more information from him. But again, thank you.
Thank you, Lou.
And
Thank you very much.
please, hopefully we'll have you again.
Thank you.